Is she? Yep, Kate's muted.
I am muted. Sorry, I realized that.
There's the sign again.
It's okay. I wasn't that far in. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for this panel about using graphic novels in the classroom. I'm Kate Applebee, and I'm a high school teacher librarian from San Bernardino County. I am really thrilled to be moderating this afternoon's panel with a talented group of creators and storytellers. I have loved diving into their works. The graphic novel strand of this year's conference has been wonderfully coordinated by Sarah Smith with tremendous support from Katie Sands at Oni Press. And let me introduce you to who's joining us today. First up, we have Jonathan Hill, who is an award-winning cartoonist who lives in Portland, Oregon, and also teaches comics at the Pacific Northwest College of Art. Make sure to check out his first two books, Americus and Wild Weather, that he created with writer M.K. Reed, as well as Odessa, which is the first book he's written and drawn himself. And Odessa has really drawn me in. The story is very engaging. Then we have also joining us is Jarod Pratt, a writer from Detroit, Michigan. Lemonade is his favorite drink, yet somehow when he was a kid, he never got the chance to run a lemonade stand of his own. I think like so many kids who really wanted to. So many years later, he wrote this book instead and lived out his childhood dream that way. Pratt has two daughters and they both drink the lemonade, but he's not sure that they really appreciate La Limonada, not like he does. Pratt really, really, really likes lemonade. Joining Jarod is Jay Odin, who is the artist for Lemonade Code. He's known for his work on the book Miles Away and his creator-owned title Chicken Fight. His ongoing series Hammer is serialized in the world's most diverse manga anthology, Saturday AM. Jay spent 2 long years of his life drawing the book you're reading right now, Lemonade Code, all while working a day job at a pharmacy. He lives in Georgia with his lovely, supportive wife and 2 hilariously cute dogs. And I have to say, the moment I brought Lemonade Code home, my daughter looked at it and was like, oh, I'm going to borrow this and read this right now, which was really nice. Also joining us is Cecil Castellucci. She's an Eisner, EGL, and Harvey Award nominated New York Times bestselling author of books and graphic novels for young adults, including Shade, The Changing Girl, Soupy Leaves Home, The Year of the Beast, 10 Stars, and Odd Duck. She's currently writing Batgirl for DC Comics and The Little Mermaid for Dark Horse Comics. She's a former children's correspondence coordinator for The Rumpus, a 2-time MacDowell Fellow, and the founding YA editor at the LA Review of Books. She lives in Los Angeles. So as you can tell, we have a fantastic panel today, and I'd love to jump into it with them. So to start, welcome everyone. But what are 1 or 2 songs that would be on the playlist to summarize or characterize the mood of your graphic novel?
This is one of those hard questions. I don't know about you all, but I always make a playlist whenever I'm writing a story because it kind of gets me into the mood. But I went with "Shake It Off" by Taylor Swift and "I Feel It All" by Feist.
Nice. Okay. I usually write the instrumentals, so I had a lot of hip hop and like K-pop instrumentals just playing while I wrote. But if I had to pick 2 songs, I'd say "Summertime" by Will Smith. It's just the perfect summer song. And I don't know if this counts as a song, but "Merry Melodies," the Looney Tunes theme music.
That's awesome. I'm actually going to use the same song that he also used, "Summertime," because I was racking my brain and I knew something like hip hoppy, was the feeling for this book, but I couldn't like think of a song that like completely said it all. So "Summertime" for sure. But when I was drawing the book, I just listened to a lot of instrumentals, and it was really, really fun just to, get lost in a soundtrack of an anime or a manga. So that's all I really did. It was really cool.
I think for me, it's Buffy St. Marie's cover of Neil Young's "Helpless." So I just think it's kind of sad and has a longing to it. And so, but so I usually make a playlist of just sort of like, it's like you're making a soundtrack to kind of get you jazzed, right? You know what I mean? But yeah, that would be sort of the title one, I guess.
Trick you to have your butt in the chair because, you know, writing and getting in the chair and actually doing it is hard. It kind of gets me right into that headspace that I need for that particular story.
Music and coffee works for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because I mean, you know, this comic didn't have any fight scenes, but whenever I would draw a fight scene, I would always put on like the most epic action-packed song that I could think of, and it's usually some type of soundtrack for, you know, some type of cartoon. So I just love doing that because you right in the right headspace.
Yeah, and I know that this is not the main topic of the discussion, but something else I think is really interesting. I know this happens to all of you too, but like when you have that list of songs and you play it when you're not at the decks too, it helps sort of like marinate the thoughts, because it's like that Pavlovian response, you know what I mean? Of like, I hear this music, I have to get to work, you know what I mean? Or I'm thinking about the work. And so even when, you know, if you're going for a bike ride or a jog or something, you put that music on, it helps you sort of like continue the thought process, because it doesn't all happen at the writing table or the drawing table, as it were.
100%. And for each book, I find it's a different, like a song that might work for one story will absolutely be like, for the other story. Anyway.
Yeah, it'll set the mood for the right story. I agree. There was no fighting music inside of this book, so yeah, I totally agree.
No, and I love hearing about that, because as a former classroom teacher, one of the things that sets the mood in the classroom is having a playlist to go with. So hearing how you all use that is really enlightening as well. Jarod and Jay, you talked about instrumentals. Like what are the instrumentals you're drawn to? Jay, you said it's usually manga based and anime based ones.
Yeah, so there's this one guy that I really like listening to. His name is Joe Hisashi. He's actually like the composer for all of the Studio Ghibli soundtrack. So if you remember Princess Mononoke or I'm blanking on so many movies right now, but Princess Mononoke, you know, yes, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Like there's several different ones, and I love the soundtrack. It's like it's so calming. It's piano. There's the giant concert version is the one that I usually listen to. So it has like all of the different instrumentals, and it's just really awesome to listen to. Just get lost in. So I love those instrumentals. If I'm not listening to something like that, and it's something to focus me more towards a mood than like Naruto soundtrack. I really like that. There's several sad scenes. So if I'm drawing a sad scene, then I'll just turn on something that'll make me feel sad. And, you know, I do the same thing for, you know, other cartoons as well. So.
Yeah, for this story, I just scoured YouTube and found a whole bunch of independent producers, and I just found a whole bunch of different songs. It was actually kind of cool because it was a lot of music I hadn't heard before. And so just finding things that had a certain kind of tempo, the beat had a certain kind of propulsion to it, kind of put me in the mood. And I found a lot of just different people who did hip hop beats and K-pop beats, and just downloaded a few songs and just rocked out to that. For different stories, I'll listen to different things, but YouTube again, like if I want to write like a big action scene in YouTube, I'll just put big action scene music. And they just give you usually like a good 3 hours of just like epic music that you can kind of get lost in. But I couldn't individually say who some of those people were on some of those soundtracks.
Yeah, another cool thing is if you listen to like lo-fi, just, you know, have it on in the background. It's just a great way to just not listen to words and just get into a mood. I love it.
That's great. I discovered lo-fi recently and was like, this is what I need to grade to.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the greatest hurdle to using graphic novels in the classroom?
I mean, I never really understand when there is a hurdle to using graphic novels in a classroom, because I feel like, you know, we live in a world now where word literacy and visual literacy is so important that to me, it doesn't really seem like there should be any barrier to using comics in the classroom, especially now when, I mean, just the explosion of incredible books that are out there that really bring home, you know, historical moments or, fiction, nonfiction, just diverse stories from everywhere, all over the world. I mean, it just seems like, why wouldn't you use it?
I agree. I think maybe like 20 years ago or so, there might have been a legitimacy issue that graphic novels were maybe not looked upon as like pure literature. But I think the times have changed, especially with the pandemic and everything. It's like there's no excuses left now.
Well, and also it's hard to read novels in school. I don't know about you all, but I struggled sometimes to like finish my chapters in time for class, and it wasn't that I didn't like reading. It was just there was other homework and playing.
Yeah.
Important.
Yeah. You need to be a kid. Yeah, I totally agree.
I think
faster. Sorry, I'm sorry.
No. I didn't mean. I know that. I think a big thing is that we're continually, because like we're continually fighting that legitimacy, right? And you also have teachers, an older generation of teachers who maybe dig their heels in the sand. And I think that comes from exposure to them. And also I think it comes from sort of like a literacy on their end of sort of like how to properly, like if they're not exposed to comics, if teachers aren't exposed to comics, if they don't have understanding of comics or like how to talk about comics, they're not going, and this is to say that teachers are already so overworked and have, especially now, having to manage everything. But I do I think that that's like a core of it, because I think when you kind of expose, kind of these things of like visual literacy, how does storytelling work, how that's commonplace so much now in our culture, like it's a pretty easy buy-in. But I think it's just a thing, like whenever anyone does something new, you kind of don't want to do it, right? That's our first instinct, or like, and so like, I think that that's a big part of it. But I also think that, again, knowing that how much it takes effort and it takes work to like kind of learn new things and like really delve in to be able to like have an understanding to sort of teach them,
Yeah.
I think that now there is a framework for that. Like when the Plain Janes, the Plain Janes came out in 2007, before Smile, before, all that. And there was nowhere to put it. Their libraries didn't have a young adult section. Bookstores wouldn't put it in the young adult section. There was no real place for this particular thing. Now there are so many great resources for, curating lists and, stuff like that I think it's a little easier. But I'm sure that you all have also had that experience where, oftentimes an adult will come to me and say, oh, yours is the first graphic novel that I've ever read, and I'm glad to be that entry gateway, because I feel like once a person finds that graphic novel, that comic book that makes them understand what a comic is and what it can do, then the gateway's open.
Yeah, I totally agree. 100%.
I mean, I think, and that we already talked about this, but like also kids now, like I'm so jealous of them, right? Like, because there is
everything.
Yeah, there's like so many books to choose from, so many, like you could learn so much from comics and have that experience. And like it wasn't the case, I was born in 1981, and so I was a kid sort of in the 80s and the 90s, and I remember it being a big deal when like outside of Calvin and Hobbes and that stuff, but like Mao's being in the Scholastic catalog and being like, what's this, like I don't know, like what I mean, like this seemed like a big deal, what I mean? And like again, I know that there's these titles that we constantly sort of like trot out, but like but even then there's like, we're talking about that fight between like association of like, comic strips, not that they aren't worthy or value, or even like comparing it to literature, like it's not, what I mean? Like I think that there's a thing of like, oh well, it's not reading, it is reading, it's a different sort of reading, it's a different sort of literacy, what I mean? So I think, to me, I think it's really around understanding and communication,
Yeah, and honestly, I feel like, growing up for me, there was Scholastic, but like it wasn't like, there was a graphic novel of Scholastic in the classroom for us to read whenever we wanted. It was more of like, hey, here's a catalog, order what you want. And then it would come into the school and you'd be able to have it and bring it home with you. So, but if there were more graphic novels in the classroom, growing up, I know I would have appreciated it a lot more, because, I didn't have trouble reading as a kid, but like it wasn't my favorite thing. And I think if I did have comic books to read a lot, I wouldn't have I wouldn't have felt so intimidated by reading like another novel as opposed to a graphic novel. I think I would have just like probably had the same like mindset towards them both. And I don't know. I think that's definitely something that, you know, if teachers did it today, you know, I'm sure that there's a kid like me that'd be out there and really appreciate that.
And I think it's also a cultural thing too, right? I'm French, you know, and so when I was growing up, way older than you, Jonathan, there was like, it was very bleak in comics land. You know, all the comics that I had were French, and that was such a part of French culture. And so it was difficult for me when I would try to bring that to school and be like, well, I'm going to read this for my book report, Tintin or whatever. And they'd be like, no, you can't do that. You know, and so I think that shift is really nice. And I mean, I can honestly say that comics helped me to learn to read words, you know, because I was, you know, we spoke French at home, but I wasn't reading French until I started reading Asterix and Tintin in French. That's how I learned to read French. And so, you know, it's very helpful to learn how to read, I think.
Well, and Jonathan brings up a really good point of we've got an older generation of teachers and librarians who haven't read a comic in years and aren't familiar with it. But I also think, and Jonathan touched on it briefly because he talked about Mouse being in the Scholastic catalog. We've also got a generation of teachers who feel like there are these graphic novels like Mouse that exist that you read in the classroom, but they don't consider everything else that you could be using in the classroom. Hopefully, eventually, we move quicker to get away from that. And it's any graphic novel can be used in the classroom, and that we stop gatekeeping.
I mean, I think we're starting to get there with, like, you know, with Jean, you know, winning the National Book Award and March winning, you know what I mean? Like Persepolis. Like, I do believe that, you know, winning the Newberries and the Caldecotts and all that, like, I do believe that is, that we're moving, you know, quickly towards that. Not quickly enough, but quickly.
I agree. You all have spoken about it a little bit. I know, Jonathan, you said that your teachers never used graphic novels in the classroom. You never saw them until
it was you know what I mean? I think it was just a generational thing. I mean, like, there just weren't, I mean, there were comics, but you know what I mean? Like, there just wasn't the exposure opportunities that there are now, where you could literally be like, what's the subject you're teaching? Okay, now here's 5 graphic novels that exist about that topic. You know what I mean? Like, there wasn't that at all, you know? And
especially for kids, right? Because, like, I think when you really think about the way that middle grade and young adult comics have really changed, it's not that, you know, there's just a difference between what there was 20 years ago and now, you know, and it's much more robust. There's more to be able to pull from, I think.
And Cecil, you brought your own in, correct? To your classroom, like,
oh yeah,
as a kid, you brought your own in.
Yeah. The only one that I was allowed to do a report on was Asterix Goes to the Olympics. That was the comic I ever managed to do a book report on. So there you go.
And Jay,
that's awesome. That's awesome.
You said you only ever saw it in the Scholastic catalog. Did you ever see graphic novels that used in any of your classrooms that you attended?
No, I would have loved it. I'm trying to like rack my brain to see if there's anything, but no. I would always bring my own like comics and like talk to other people about it, but that was pretty much the gist of comic books. And either that or like maybe we would talk about like a cartoon, like, I don't know, the Magic School Bus or something. Like that was about it. So.
And Jarod, did you ever, like, where was your experience in this continuum?
Oh no, so just like Jonathan said, I was born in '78, so there really just wasn't a lot of it around. Also, culturally, to speak to what Cecil said, I'm from like the east side of Detroit, and as a young Black guy, comic books in my neighborhood, they weren't really cool. So it wasn't really a thing that people were really even trying to, it wasn't even a thought in the schools I went to. You know, like they were just considered like a trifle, I guess. You know, like people didn't take you seriously if you read comics. You were like the uncool kid or like the nerd or something like that. So No, so by the time my schooling was done, graphic novels probably took off after I was all done with school, like well into college. So
So thinking back to that, what graphic novel do you think your childhood self would have really connected with in the classroom? Yours or someone else's work?
oh, what grade are we going for here?
Whatever grade you would like.
Um,
You call it.
I'd say the Sandman graphic novels because I read them in graphic novel form and I didn't really read them in single issues. I would say that introduced me to what comics could be in a way that I never really thought about it before. I grew up on superhero comics, Marvel and DC. So, and that was still a DC comic, but to read it and see just the breadth of storytelling, how it pulled from different parts of literature and just the scope of it all, it made me realize how epic like comic books could be. And in a different way, not just like in the superhero fights, intergalactic war way.
I mean, for me, Watchmen and Dark Knight came out when I was in high school, and I read them, and they were life changing, you know. And then when I moved to Montreal, I started working at a cafe where they started doing comic book jams. So they would have these live comic draw, you know, people would draw and stuff. And it was people like Chester Brown and Seth and Julie Doucette. And that was when I was like 19. So that was like really, you know, what was sort of bathing over me. So for me, right as I was turning into a 20-year-old, comics just were like, you know, Sandman had just come out, you know, Animal Man, Constantine, like all of that stuff. That was my, you know, Love and Rockets.
That's a good one.
Oh, comics.
I think for me it was, you know, and this ties into sort of, you know, I did an Own Voices panel earlier this morning, and I think the thing for me is I would have loved to have kind of exposure to some stories that, like, struggling with like my cultural identity being Vietnamese American and then being raised in the dominant culture and not really have any sort of touchstone to that Vietnamese culture, and just how like now as an adult I'm like reading Vietnamese literature and graphic novels, you know, like GB Tran's Viet in America or Chibui's The Best We Could Do, which are both about sort of the immigrant experience. But then there was like a Vietnamese French cartoonist, Marcelino Trong, who did A Pretty Little War, that's about sort of his experience being French Vietnamese there. And then, you know, there was one other one, but just like, again, I didn't realize I was struggling with my cultural identity until I became an adult. And so to have something, you know, and again, I think this speaks to the power of comics. It's not that they all have to be like that, but just to have these that sort of like, you know, it's so hard to talk to your parents about these things. Like, you know, if I asked my mom, like, you know, I remember sending her a copy of The Best We Could Do. And I remember visiting her and asking like if she read it, because it was a way for me to connect, even though the stories are totally different. It was a way for me to relate to her experience. And I asked her if she read it, and she said she didn't. And I was kind of hurt. But then she was like, I don't want to relive those memories. I don't want to relive being in a concentration camp in the North Vietnamese, or I don't want to relive being on the boat, or like all this stuff. And so like for me to have a narrative that isn't my family's narrative, but is so close and help me relate and understand my parents, you know, I might be, you know, so much more connected to that part of me, you know, 25, 30 years sooner than you know, it's kind of taken me now.
Thank you for sharing that. Jade, did you want to weigh in at all? You don't have to. I just want to make sure you've got.
I mean, you know, when it comes to, you know, just reading comics, I don't know. I was just a normal kid. I liked Dragon Ball Z. Like I loved like looking at all these things every time I ran into a Books A Million or whatever. You know, so that was really cool. But like inside of the actual school, you know, I would have loved to have like read Mouse. You know, I saw that as an adult in my college years, and I was like, oh wow, this is really cool. And like I just thought it was awesome. You know, I wish that there were more stuff like that, like just in every subject. I think that would be really cool. Like, you know, not obviously as depressing, but you know, I think it would be really awesome just to, you know, have that experience and everything, because it really, like Jonathan said, you know, allows you to, you know, to see how, you know, things are and actually like, you know, want to I don't know. Like I think that it would have been a lot better in making me have that experience as a kid as opposed to an adult, because it would have jump started a lot more in my life.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. If a teacher or a group of students were to, this was their first encounter with graphic novels, what advice would you give them to for reading a graphic novel if they've never read one before?
My advice would be to just read it like a normal book. It's left to right. I mean, it's just don't think too hard about it, because I think that can confuse you more. I think just sit back, try to enjoy the story. If the artist and the writer are doing their job like as effectively as they should, then it should be a very easy like read for you. So I think that's just take it easy, don't think too hard about it. That's my advice.
I would say enjoy the silence of it, and really engage with the images. You can, I think one of the most brilliant things about comics is that you can rest on a page, and just kind of hang out with
Yeah,
it. And
totally agree.
sometimes, as we writers know, the ones that don't draw, right, like you can throw out the words and just have the image there, and that will, it really is a voyage that you go on. So really rest with the book. Take your time.
And I guess for me, it's just like, I mean, it's funny because you don't ask a kid. I think a kid that picks up and reads comics, they just do it. You know what I mean? They just kind of do it intuitively. I guess I'll sort of twist my answer a little bit to think about to kind of talk about what I was talking about earlier. And I think again, a big thing about teachers teaching comics in the classrooms is for them to think about like what goes into making a comic. Like, what about those quiet moments? Or for me, I often think about like the relationship between poetry and comics, and how so much of it is about the space in between, and how it's what's not said, what isn't shown, you know what I mean, and how the reader sort of puts those together. And so it's like I kind of I think that there should be I guess again, I'm not really answering your question, I'm making my own answer, but I think that like there's so many resources to talk about comics now, but also just, and I think obviously I have a bias because I teach comics and sort of how comics work, and I teach it in high schools and middle schools, and I teach at the college level, but just like to like stress that like it's the same thing. There's all these Gatsby books coming out now, adaptations of the Gatsby, because it just hit the public domain. It's just like have a teacher not use it to just teach Gatsby, but use it to be like, how is this comic? How is it taking sort of the core themes of Gatsby, and how is it bringing it to life? How is it using the quiet moments, the time, the space in between, all of these things, So again, that didn't really answer your question, but I think it's kind of tied into it where like, then a teacher can help a student think about like, oh, you're reading a comic, it's fun. It's like, oh, it's awesome. Maybe there's a fight scene or maybe there's not or whatever. I'm learning about science or whatever, but then be like, okay, well, how are you learning about it? How are they using comics to like teach you about it?
I think, Jonathan, like the what's not being said, that's the key. You know what I mean? Like, I think that is actually really answering the question, because I think that's the beauty of comics versus prose, right? I mean, I write prose as well. I don't know if you do, Jarod, but it's very busy. Prose is very busy. Whereas, like, if you don't have to say anything and something's not being said, boy, that's a huge thing. So, I think that's the key.
No, and Jonathan, I appreciate your answer because you do teach comics. And so you've got that insight as to what does it look like when we're teaching it. Thinking of that, one of the questions from the chat was she's starting a book club for middle school students. And we've talked a little bit about the format of how you would teach comics. How much would you expect them to read weekly?
A comic? I would expect to read the whole thing probably in a day. I think that's the great thing about comics.
Yeah, I think if it was a good enough story, you wouldn't even realize that time passed. Like you would just be like, "Oh wow, it's 5 o'clock already."
Or it's like, let me just check the thing. I mean, they're doing a weekly book club. You know, like I just like read one in a week, and then you have time, like you said, you know, because I always will generally read something twice, where I'll read through it once and be like, and because I just want to know what happens, and then I usually read through it again, and then I take my time and be like, oh, I love how they did this. I love how the writer and the artists are doing this. You know what I mean? Like, and so, you know, I think a week is reasonable to like you read a book and then you think about it and you sit on it and then you talk about it the next week. You know.
Totally.
Thank you all for that. So we often think about using graphic novels in the English classroom because it's like poetry. It's a place where we can engage with it. But I think each of yours could apply elsewhere. I really felt like Lemonade Code would be good for like STEAM and coding and business. I kind of want to hand it to our business department and be like, look, you should read this for like a business aspect to it. Um, I love the Plain Janes for art and social emotional learning and social justice and history. And I like so many tie-ins to it. Um, and Odessa, like you could do science stuff with it, and but the wilderness studies and the survivalism of it all. What aspect of each of your graphic novels would you encourage teachers and students to dive deeper into?
I'd definitely say the coding. I think the future is just in coding, and it's just so much to learn. It's flexible. I don't actually know that much about coding, so I had to do research. So it'd be interesting to see that the book be used to actually give people a good grasp on coding, and also I'd say theoretical physics. There's a lot in there about superstring theory and things like that. One thing I think about kids is that the malleability of their brains, like the way they take information in, they really are good at grasping complex concepts more than we give them credit for. And really, as adults, our brains kind of stagnate, and so it might be harder. So if you can introduce some of these complex topics to kids earlier, there's a good chance that it'll ignite a fire in them, and they'll just keep on with it, and they'll go deeper and deeper into it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I actually wrote down coding for my answer because I mean it's in everything. Like I mean, and the way the future is going, I mean, you know, it's just like if you know how to code, it's like having a superpower. So like I think that would be definitely something that you should look into more for sure.
I would say art and activism for the Plain Janes, you know, finding your voice in that sense. I mean, the thesis of the book is art saves, and I really think that art is what saves us as humans and helps us to grasp and grapple with the world. You know, the book is also about recovering from trauma. So, you know, and sort of negotiating the after effects of trauma, right? Jane, the main Jane, was in a terrorist bombing, and she decides to become a street artist because she wants an attack to be something beautiful rather than something terrifying, and that's how she heals. So I think it's also about, you know, finding a way forward. We're all going through a big trauma right now, you know, and on multiple levels, and I think that art and activism is a core thing that will get us all through.
You know, I think a big thing is like, you know, even if it's not directly tied to climate change, I think that there's a big discussion to be had about sort of like the world change. You know, it's funny, there was, you know, the main theme of Odessa is sort of like, you know, searching for their mother and sort of this you know, that heartache of loss and the questions that come up with loss and how you search for those answers. That's what it's about. But as I was doing it, I had a student who did some production design help, like get files together and stuff, and they talked to me about how they saw this other theme about how it's this world that has ended, and it's sort of the full of tropes of the like cutthroat apocalyptic world of like survival at all costs sort of stuff, and how the kids are kind of pushing up against that. And they were like, this, I relate to this because here, you know, they're 20 years old, they're getting ready to graduate, and they're inheriting this world that has been destroyed by adults. Like, you know, it's like the adults in the world in Odessa decided to make these systems in place to have the world run the way it is. And they were just like, you know, to have that in place, even though it's, you know, it's sort of more fantastical. You know, they said that they just related to that about what it's like to inherit this sort of horrible world, and how, you need to have to keep hope and to keep fighting for the things that you sort of believe in. I was incredibly touched because I didn't even, I was like, oh yeah, that was something I was totally going for, but it just came out naturally. But that was, I hadn't seen that. So I think outside of that, and I think on a practical level, sort of like, here on the West Coast, we're all waiting for that big one, right? That it's it's supposed to tear up and down the coast, and just sort of like preparedness of just like what do you have, what do you need, what would be, what I mean, what do you have in place, just something to think about. I don't know, you need to, I think it'd be helpful to, it's just something to kind of, again, just disaster preparedness.
And also hopefulness. I mean, I think one of the things, Jonathan, that great science fiction does is to allow us to imagine possibilities, in a hopeful way, as well as in a dystopic, terrible way, and so I think that pushback is part of the growth that we all need, right? Like, so I think that's a value in classrooms.
Especially now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels like, I mean, the fires this summer, the snow in Texas. I mean, it's not crazy talk to think that,
Yeah, the dystopia thing is actually, I tried to create a future that was a little bit brighter, and a little bit more hopeful, actually, because I have I have a 14-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old daughter. And a lot of the fiction out there will lean towards the dystopic kind of this. They write hope into it. It's good, but we just don't get visions of the future too often that are just colorful and bright and something to look forward to. And I think that's just important to show kids that, look, here's your place in the future. This future is coming, and maybe it's not going to be as bad as we all want to make it seem. There's a lot of doomsayers out there, I guess, and it'd be nice just to see a little bit more positive, especially like in children's fiction. So.
Well, and
I really liked. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I was just gonna say I really like that aspect of the book because it was obviously fun to work on, but it was just really cool to picture a future story, because I have a future story of myself that is dystopian. So I mean, like to be able to work on another book that isn't dystopian but set in the future, it was a nice fresh breath of fresh air. So it was really cool.
Well, and I really loved your bright colors in it. Like I loved the dancing in it. There was this hope, but I loved how you balanced it, Jarod, because there were moments where the world wasn't quite as shiny. Like I feel like we lean two ways. We either lean super dystopian or we lean like, hey, it's going to be a utopia. And I felt like yours was a future that I could walk into, that would exist. And
Thank you.
Jonathan, I absolutely loved the siblings. Having 2 younger brothers, I was like, oh, this is something that this is what would have happened in my life. They would have followed me, and I would have been as annoyed and bothered, but accepted them on it. And Cecil, Plain Jane's we've been a Lumberjanes reading family, and the moment I picked up Plain Jane's, my husband was like, oh yeah, that's been like featured in the back, like I've seen this, I know this. And I was like, okay, cool, this is gonna like fit right in with our household. And I love the friendship of the girls, and I love that they're all different. So I just wanted to say that thank you for sharing what you would share with kids and teachers. Your works are really, they have a beautiful depth to them that I think can be used by anyone, really. So thinking about your graphic novel, if you were going to pair it with the traditional novel, what do you think that pairing would be?
This is one of those trick questions. I wish I would have had an answer prepared, I think.
It's okay, Jonathan.
I agree.
You can opt out.
Oh no, I don't want to opt out. I just need, it's just,
I had to look at what books are being taught in schools because I couldn't remember. So I did look, I Googled, and I came up with The Giver, I thought, or maybe a book like Animal Farm or Catcher in the Rye, Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. Those kinds of books where you're kind of pushing against authority and trying to sort of find your place in a sort of unfair world.
So the book that I have is, I don't even remember exactly what the age group is. I read it like, I don't know, when I was in fourth grade. So I'm assuming like 10 years old or so. But it was a book called Frindle. And I remember this book being one of my favorite books like growing up. So yeah, I would pair it with that because like at the end of the book, it kind of like time skips where he's in the future. And his word that he made up, Frindle, is now in the dictionary. So I like the aspect of him being in the future. So I'm gonna pair that with lemonade code being in the future. So yeah,
Mm.
it has nothing to do with the book, but the same feeling. The same feeling. It's what I'm. Yeah.
Well, I don't remember the name of this book, and it was so long ago, but I recall a book. There was a kid that lived in, where did he live? I think like on a farm or somewhere. He started building all these robots to help with chores. I couldn't even tell you the name of it. It was like, I might have been like a third grade. It was so long ago.
That's awesome.
Oh man, I love to. If not that, maybe A Wrinkle in Time. I don't know if that's taught, but that was a pretty good book, and it deals with multiple dimensions and some of the mathematics and a few things in a certain way that I think could pair up pretty nicely.
And there's a great graphic novel of A Wrinkle in Time as well.
Is there?
Yeah.
Hope Larson.
I had no idea. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
I can't. This is like that. I'm just stuck. But I guess I'll just say that. I mean, for me, I was probably one of the odder kids in that. Like, I really loved all the books we were assigned in school because it made me read something I wouldn't have normally picked up, and just to find and again, I'm not being like, oh, I was so advanced or whatever when in my young age, but I just remember being this thing where, I'd huff and puff and not want to read it, but then read it and be like, and be able to like kind of dig it, or like, I just remember loving Wuthering Heights, like reading it, like, and just being like totally digging it, and just like, and then same with all the books that I had to read for like AP Lit and stuff, and I think I enjoyed that, and so part of me is just like, the fun of it would be like, what's a book, like what's a sort of classic book about loss or tragedy or like that yearning, and then comparing it, and then being able to compare to contrast, or any book. Like I think someone put in the chat, like pick any book, because then it's so great because you might find similarities that you might not have found, or you know what I mean, like or things that were done differently. I don't know. It's kind of a cop-out answer, but
No, I think that's a great point. Like, because I feel like there are conversations between literature that you don't necessarily need like a read alike exactly, because you can find hopefulness or grief or, so I guess maybe I think that's a great answer, Jonathan.
Jonathan, is there a poem that you think you would connect it to? I just figured I'd give you another. You don't have to. I just wanted to
I can't think of one off the top of my head. Yeah, I can't. There's one, I can't think of the name of the poem, but there is Anis Majani is the Oregon Poet Laureate, and he has a poem I've seen him perform a couple times about just sort of like, it's just kind of like a love letter to everybody out in the world that's having a good time or having a hard time, and like not a good time, the very, very different, but just like to appreciate that sort of like difficulty that you're having, and that know that you're in it together. And I wish I could remember the name of it, and maybe I'll find it and email it. But if you get a chance to look him up and see him perform that, it's just really beautiful. And so I guess I feel really proud of myself for thinking of the answer if I can't remember that poem.
That's okay. Librarians are good researchers. We'll go dig it up. So Elaine asked, so we know when we engage with something that we love to read, one of the natural outlets to it is to then play with creation of it. And Elaine asked, do you have any great resources or apps you would recommend for students to try their hand at creation of comics and the graphic novel format?
So when it comes to drawing, I would recommend Clip Studio Paint. I've been using them since they were called Manga Studio back in like, I don't know, it's been at least 10 years, and I love it. It's awesome. There's so many different tools, and you can download new swatches, and you can animate in there if you want. There's so many possibilities. So I think that Clip Studio Paint is definitely a good program to try to get.
I'd say on the writing side, there's a lot of scripts you can find on the internet that'll give you a look at the format and give you a good idea of the pacing of a comic book script. Writing software wise, I use Writer's Duet, and they actually do have a template that they have in there for graphic novels, which is actually pretty cool.
That's awesome.
I would just, yeah, I would say pen and paper, obviously. But because I think that's the kind of easiest app to use, you know, if there's a simple exercise that I do when I do a school visit about comics, you know, where I just have like four panels where we'll write a story together, and it'll be like the intro, the setup, the intro, the twist, the conclusion, and to just sort of tell the story in 4 panels, you know, like how do you get from one to the other, I think is the easiest way to sort of help kids to understand how you move that forward without being so verbose with words.
Yeah, I guess, you know, I'm going to piggyback off that. And I would just say that, like, don't, like, yeah, pencil, paper, whatever you have capable. If you have an iPad, use an iPad. If you have pencil, paper, but like, I think a lot of the times the technology can get in the way of things, because how many times have we been like, oh, I see this artist using this sketchbook, I'm going to buy that sketchbook and buy that pen and think that I'm magically going to have their power, like that's what powers them, or I'm going to use Clip Studio Painter, I need a Cintiq, I need an iPad Pro. And that's like, honestly, that's crap, because it's like, and like you think that tool is what's going to make you good. You know what I mean? Not that, I mean, I love Clip Studio Paint too. I'm a strong advocate. I teach Clip Studio Paint classes. You know what I mean? But like, I think for me, it's like, as if you're starting out, just do it. Just make it. Copy the things that you like. You know what I mean? Like, you know, if you read the books for the folks in this panel, like copy them. Like, you know what I mean? But make it your own. That's how we all started out, I'm sure. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I'm going to make a story that's Spider-Man, but it's not a Spider-Man. It's like Beetle Man. And you know what I mean? Like it has, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and because that's how you sort of like through osmosis sort of like learn the ropes, you know what I mean? And but that 4-panel thing, that's what I do in my classes too, because again, it's like it teaches you about that rhythm. And then, you know, where I use sticky notes, honestly, that would be my recommendation, is because then sticky notes, I do all my, and I think pencil or paper is really important, because I still do my thumbs analog, because I need that like pencil to paper, there's working out of problem solving that I can't do when I try to do thumbs digitally. I just Control Z every mistake. Whereas like if I write it out and don't like it, I scratch it off and then do the next thing. But I've learned from that, you know.
And with the 4-panel thing, because I'm a writer and not an illustrator, when I do it in the classroom, I say, if you can draw, then you can draw the 4 panels. But if you can't draw, or if you don't feel like you can draw, you can just write what you would tell the artist to put in those. And that's helpful as well for the pace, the writing pacing.
Well, I think we've reached the end of our time. Thank you, Jarod and Jay and Jonathan and Cecil, for hanging out today and chatting about graphic novels in the classroom and your own works and the journeys they all take us on. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yes,
It's
thank
nice
you.
Yeah,
meeting all of you.
this was great. Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank
Talk
you.
to you all. Really, really lovely. I can't wait to see you again in person, Jonathan, and to meet
Yeah.
you, Jarod and Jay.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yes, same here.
Yeah.
For sure.
Comic Cons!
Yay.
Can't wait.
Thanks,
I cannot
thanks.
wait.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
And Kate, thanks for hosting. Appreciate it.
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
I'll see you all later.
Thank you.